Audit methodology. The audit methodology is the characteristic steps that we'll follow in performing the audit. It is a documented set of procedures designed to ensure we can meet the objectives of the audit we put in the audit plan and audit engagement letter. An audit is not an ad hoc, chaotic process. It should be done in a very formally documented and consistent manner across the organization. The phases, therefore, of an audit start with determining what is the audit area or audit subject. What is the objective, or what do we want to prove or disprove through the accomplishment of this audit? What is the scope and boundaries? What will be included in this audit, and what will rather be outside of then the scope of this audit? It is important when we conduct an audit that we have done pre-audit planning. We want to ensure that we know as much as possible about the audit subject and the types of tests necessary in order to meet the audit objective before we actually go and waste the time then of the auditees. We will then, based on the pre-audit planning we have done, put together the tasks, steps, tests, and procedures that will be used during the audit. These will set out the steps for how we're going to ensure we've gathered the right data that we can use then in the analysis. We will then have the procedures for how to evaluate the tests we've conducted, or how to then review the results of the various pieces of audit work papers and evidence that we have collected. We'll also specify in the audit plan how we plan to communicate with management. This will be in compliance with the audit charter, but it's important we have clear procedures on how then and which managers will then be given a copy of this audit. We will then put together the audit report and ensure that we've included any management response when we prepare that final report. So the audit subject. This is the area that we intend to audit. We'll define then clearly that scope and what is within the scope of the audit and that which is outside of the scope of the audit. We'll declare the audit objectives, the purpose of the audit, for example, to, say, validate controls over accounts payable, and to ensure that those controls are adequate to make sure we only pay legitimate vendors and only in the amount that they are to be paid. In doing audit scope and pre-audit planning, we'll identify specific areas or timelines for the review. In some cases, we know that there's a better time to do an audit when, for example, the audit is not going to have an undue impact on business operations, or we want to ensure that we're not going to conduct an audit of a system which is about to undergo a major revision or retrofit. When we've done the pre-audit planning, we've looked at what types of skilled resources would be necessary to conduct this audit. For example, if this is going to be an audit of a web application, do we have a person that can be assigned to this audit that has that skill in order to then properly test a web application? We will also then look at what sources of information are available to us for the audit. For example, documentation, individuals. Who do we need to talk to? Who are the sources of information we require? We will then identify the location of the audit. In many cases, the audit area may operate in different offices in different regional locations, even sometimes in different countries. So we'll examine what audits need to be done and at which location this would need to be conducted. We also will determine and have agreement with management on who then should respond to any audit findings, who can help us with any audit evidence gathering, as well as, in some cases, provide them the access that's necessary and be the person we go to in the case of a material finding. We've put together a clear communications plan so everybody knows what will be done with the information gathered from this audit. The audit procedures and steps then for data gathering is to select the correct audit approach. How are we going to gather the test data necessary that we can come to an accurate audit conclusion and finding? We may, of course, do sampling of certain transactions. We may conduct interviews, or in some cases, we'll observe how a process actually works. We want to identify a list of people that we would like to interview, and this should include both management and users, as well as any technical people, customers, or others that could be familiar with this operation, any problems or issues that this operation may have had in the past. We will always gather information about the policies and procedures from that department. How are things supposed to be done? We want to check for compliance. And are people complying then with the procedures? Now, obviously, if it turns out that they're not complying with the various procedures, then we have to examine why is that. Is it because the policies, procedures, and baselines are wrong, and they need to be then amended, or is it because we need to step in and ensure compliance with those policies and standards correctly? Many times we'll have to develop audit tools that could be used to test, for example, certain types of transactions, or to generate the sample of then the number of transactions we are going to actually review. There are a number of automated tools, everything from, of course, Excel spreadsheets to, of course, very sophisticated tools we can use in conducting various types of tests. The procedures then for evaluating the test or reviewing the results would be that we look at the methods and the tools used in the actual gathering of the information and testing the system. These could, of course, be automated tools or, in some cases, scripts that we have access to that we can run on the system. We also have to know what is a pass, as well as what would be an inadequate or a failure. This is going to be based on what were the objectives of the test. What were we trying to prove? Are we seeking for 100% compliance, or would 90% be good enough? Well, we need to determine that. Once we have the test data, we will look through it to confirm the accuracy of the results and whether or not that test data is complete and whether or not it is, of course, reliable. When we set out the procedures for communication and reporting, we will also look at the frequency of communication. How often will we report to management on the status of the audit, as well as what will then be the format of the final report and the distribution of who should receive that report. Once we, of course, start to prepare the report, we'll provide information in the report about follow-up procedures that will come following the release of this report to ensure that controls have remained effective or any changes actually accomplish the desired result. We'll define then our procedures that were used to evaluate operational efficiency and what procedures we used when we conducted our tests. We'll provide audit opinion on the soundness of our policies, the soundness of procedures and documentation, and whether we believe that the controls are adequate to then protect these systems and operations. A lot of our work that we gather in the conduct of an audit will then be retained as audit work papers. It's important we document all of this because it's going to be necessary to support then the actual audit report, as well as for future reference if there is some type of dispute about the audit content and validity. We will have, as the audit work papers, the audit plan that was developed in order to conduct this audit. We will specify which programs, tests, and tools were used to conduct the audit, and what the findings were as a result of those tests. We'll also indicate if there are any incidents or things that were discovered during the actual conduct of the audit, and how those could have possibly affected then the validity of the data that was received. In some cases, the auditor may have been under some type of limitation. It could be that management did not cooperate, certain information was not made available to the auditor, and therefore in the audit report should be listed any limitation that could affect then the actual validity, completeness, and accuracy of this audit. All of these should be documented and retained as audit work papers. We will keep these for whatever time period is necessary to validate the integrity of the audit in case there is a question about any of the findings or opinions within the audit itself. In summary, all of our audits should follow a consistent and approved audit methodology. We need a defined audit methodology that is done consistently so management can compare the results of different audits and will have therefore a greater and more consistent insight into the way in which we conduct the audit process and the integrity of then the audit findings.